are having a presentation from National Treasury. Can you please mute? Are having a presentation from having a presentation from we are muted from National Treasury. I'm switching off my video. I'm getting a feedback, but I'm continuing. Honorable members, we are getting a presentation from National Treasury as we deal with the Appropriations Amendment Bill. Let me start by welcoming all of you. I'll be co-chairing with Honorable Njadu. The reason being that Honorable Mahlangu, the chairperson of the Select Committee, is having a bereavement at home. Her grandmother passed on yesterday. As both committees were saying, our heartfelt condolences to the family. We are doing this in compliance. Honorable members, please mute your please mute your mics. Thank you. So this is in line with both the stipulations of the Money Bills Act and the PFMA. So we must go through this process. How we'll do it, I'll allow National Treasury, I think Dr. Mampo is around already, to make a presentation. We agreed there are a lot of issues that she must cover, that it will be about an hour. And then after that, we'll take questions from the honorable members and then allow them to respond to whatever would have raised. But thank you very much, honorable members. Can I get from Lubabalo, do we have any apologies from your side?
Thank you, Chairperson. We, as the Select Committee on Appropriations, Chairperson, we have 3 apologies. Honorable Tutoit, Chair, Honorable Moletsane, and Chairperson Mahlangu, Chairperson. Those are the 3 apologies that we have received, Chair.
Thank you so much. Darren, from your side.
Chairperson, from Standing Committee, we only received the apology from Ms. Peters. That's it, Chair.
Yeah. There's also an apology from Honorable Matafa.
Okay.
Is also attending to a bereavement.
All right.
Okay, honorable members, do we have National Treasury secretaries?
Yes, Chairperson. I saw Mr. Sishi. I can see Dr. Modisa, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm also Chair David Masondo.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Let's just start right away. As I said, that the DG is also in. Okay. So thank you so much, colleagues from National Treasury. Deputy Minister Masondo, can you please come in with your team? You have exactly an hour to finish all your business. The time now is 12:34. So 13:34, you'll have to step down. DM, you're welcome.
No, thanks. I won't be long. I think as we're all aware that the 2020 Special Appropriation Bill has been necessitated by the outbreak of COVID, and we really thank the committee, the Parliament, for really moving with speed in making sure that we table the budget, and thanks once more for this opportunity to present the 2020 Appropriation Bill, particularly the distribution of funds across national votes. We've already presented, Chair, the fiscal framework, the division of revenue bill. We're at the point where we're coming back to you to present the distribution of funds across votes. So I won't take a lot of time since you've already indicated that we really don't have a lot of time. So I'll ask Dr. Modise to, together with the DG, to lead us insofar as the presentation is concerned. And Chair, may I also apologize that I won't be with the committees because I've got to join a mini plenary on the National Treasury budget vote, so which is taking place this afternoon. So I will really ask to be excused by the committee, but the team will be with you throughout. Thank you, Chair. DG.
Thank you, DM. Can the backroom staff just
remind the chair?
Yes. As Honorable Njadu come in. Babado.
I'm sorry, Chairperson. I'm sorry about that, Chair. I would like to remind you to keep on reminding our guests to switch on their cameras because the TV guys are phoning me. I mean, my colleagues, they are phoning me. So I'm sorry about that hiccup, Chair. There.
Okay. That's fine. Safe to say that the face of the Deputy Minister is being cut. We only see the bottom part of his spectacles. So if you can just readjust it. Okay, thank you. Is Honorable Njatu in? Babado will indicate to me, but that's fine. DG, Dr. Mampo, please continue.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Good afternoon, honorable members. Thank you so much for having Treasury present on the Adjustment Appropriation Bill. Chairperson, I'm going to share my screen, which would be the presentation. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes. Continue.
Yeah. Yes, we can see.
All right, so thank you so much, Chairperson. I will be doing this presentation with Dr. Roy Haveman, who is going to take the committee through the updates of the credit guarantee scheme, but I will be doing the rest of the presentation on the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. So basically, Chairperson and honorable members, the Minister of Finance, according to the Monies Bill and Related Matters Act, is allowed to or it enables the minister to table an adjustments budget. As you are aware, most of the time the adjustments budget is tabled in October. This is the first time we actually had to do an adjustments budget a few months after doing the budget review, but it is allowed according to the Act. But what enables the minister to do that would be if there's significant changes in the fiscal and economic impact, especially on the finances of the country, and the fact that there was a national state of disaster that was declared as a result of COVID necessitated that the minister tables the special adjustments budget or the adjustments budget. Basically, honorable members and chairperson, what we were looking at was trying to specify the type of spending that is allowed under the adjustments. And basically what we were looking at is adjusting spending due to significant and unforeseeable economic and financial reasons, and then shifting between votes because we had to move money from one vote to, from other votes to the other votes that were financially under pressure. All of these adjustments that will not be included in the specific adjustments, we will definitely include these in the October 2020, and any other movement between now and October will be included there in the October Adjustments Bill. So basically, honorable members and chairperson, what we are looking at in terms of this committee, which is the Standing Committee on Appropriations, is that once the fiscal framework has been adopted by the National Assembly, we look at the Division of Revenue Bill, and once that is accepted or adopted, then we in the process of the appropriations legislation. So basically what the appropriation legislation does is that it distributes the income, or it distributes the allocations of the national sphere across the 41 national votes. So basically, chairperson and honorable members, this committee has the powers to change the appropriations of departments. But what is important to note is that the bottom line has to remain the same. So for every proposal to increase an allocation for one vote, it means there will be a same amount of a decline in another vote. So basically what this means is that after the division of revenue is passed, what the appropriation committee does is to make sure that the split that is allocated to the national department is allocated fairly across all the departments. Therefore, you have the powers to move money within the votes, but the bottom line has to be the same. So honorable members and chairperson, when we started with this process, the president announced that we will need to find 130 billion from within existing budgets. So what we had to do as a starting point as the budget analyst in Treasury was to look at the type of expenditure that we have. So honorable members, this slide gives you what, in a simplest form, how the budget of the country is structured. So basically you start with a total expenditure of about 1.7 trillion. When you start taking out things that seem to be non-discretionary, you will see that your compensation of employees, which is what you need to pay, and it's sort of semi-discretionary. You have interest on land, which is a direct charge from the National Revenue Fund, so you have to pay for it. Then you have transfers to provinces and municipalities. This will be the direct charge, and these are things like your equitable share of provinces and local government, but also some of the conditional grants to both provinces and municipalities. If you take out those in this 1.7 trillion, then you have the subsidies that government pays for higher education institutions, and we also have to pay our membership for foreign governments and international organizations. You also have some of the subsidies that you pay for public corporations and private enterprises. You have social grants that we need to pay, and then in goods and services, you have a category that is called operational leases, where it doesn't matter whether you have occupied the building or not, you still have to pay for those leases. And we also committed funds that we're going to assist ESCOM and some of the state-owned entities that are having liquidity challenges. What you have left, basically, honorable members and chairperson, you only left with about 235 billion. Now, if you have to find 130 billion of the 234, basically it means you have to take away 43% of that money, that equates to 130 billion. But this this is not the end point. You still have to give some money to departmental agencies and accounts, and the biggest ones of those would be entities such as your South African Revenue Services, your NFSAS fall part of these, Sanral non-toll form part of these, the IEC also form part of this. So it won't be possible to just blindfoldedly remove money from these entities. You also have payment for capital assets, and these are mainly some of the capital buildings and machinery that the departments buy. You still have the rest of goods and services where you're looking at consultants, you have fuel, all of those form part of this. And we also do still give money for non-profit organizations. So when we were given the task to find 130 billion, what became very clear is that the nature of this budget doesn't allow us to easily just take away 130 billion. What we also did, honorable members, was to analyze what happens when we protect other departments. So when we got the message from the president, we were told that find the 130 billion, but make sure you protect the Department of Health, the departments in the security cluster, which is your police and the defense force. We were also asked to basically protect social development. So if you look at the structure of the budget, if we had to find a 130 billion across the board, basically, or 100 billion, basically you're looking at a 10% budget reduction for every vote at a national level. But the moment you start excluding departments, so you look at these 5 departments, when you exclude them from the budget reduction, it means for the rest of the departments that are there, it is a 20% reduction that you're gonna have to find. And when things progressed, honorable members and chairperson, we realized that there are other pressures that we need to deal with. So for example, in human settlement, immediately they had to start mobilizing clean water using the tanks. Transport had to deal with the taxis, the taxi ranks, and make sure that they sanitize all of those. Water and sanitation had to look at how they fast-track providing water to informal settlements. Now, the moment you start removing departments, you realize whatever pot is left, it means you're going to increase the percentage that you need. But another thing, honorable members and chairperson, that I want the committee to take note of is that our budgets basically are very labor intensive. So basically this column here just explains to you that, for example, if we take out the 5 departments, which is health, social development, police and defense and correctional services, the share of non-compensation budget that you will need to come to the 100 billion that is required will be 32%. If you exclude human settlement, transport and water, it means the share of non-compensation budget increases even more. So basically, if you exclude these 7 departments, you have to basically find about 42% of what is left when you exclude compensation for the other departments, which became very difficult to justify, because when we were doing this assessment, we had to balance what is announced by the president. We have to find what is announced by the president, because we were tasked to do that and we had to do so. We also had to look at, if we find this money, what happens to the rest of the departments that are classified as not frontline, or they don't provide frontline services when it comes to COVID. So those were the balancing act, honorable members and chairperson, that we had to do as the Treasury. My computer is frozen. Okay, so what we looked at, honorable members, is that we looked at the possible programs that we can suspend, one, and when we suspend those programs, do we think that, how do we measure the impact? Is the impact going to be minimal or significant? Secondly, is there a possibility that within these departments we can find areas where we can suspend but reallocate some of the funding to the same department so that they deal with the rising pressures of COVID? And then how we wanted to present it to the committee and to the public was to be very transparent and show you where we were when we started in the budget. Were there any suspensions or areas where we identified that can be suspended with minimal impact on service delivery and the functioning of the departments? We also show how we reallocated these funds within the department, and then we also show the net change and the total allocation for the rest of the year. So in in summary, Chairperson and honorable members, as I said, we were tasked to find 130 billion, but of that 130, the 100 was supposed to come from the national department. So what we have found was about 100 billion or 109 billion of temporary suspension. But what we have realized is that the department need the money. The department still required the money, so we couldn't take the whole 100 billion and take it out and give it to frontline departments. So most of the money remained within the different departments where we've identified the temporary suspension. So basically, the suspension is about 54 billion that came or that was allocated in national departments. About 13.8 billion of that was on conditional grants, and about 12.6 billion was in local conditional grant. And the suspension in terms of provinces for their equitable share, as you would have heard in the presentations of the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, were about 20 billion. So in summary, this is what I've mentioned, honorable members, but basically what the way the money went to just quickly was support to the vulnerable household. That will be social development. There was a 21.5 billion that was allocated to both provincial and national health. Support to municipalities ended up at 20 billion. Other frontline services, honorable members and chairperson, will mainly be money that went to the Defense Force and the police service. There was also money allocated for basic and higher education, and mainly this money was to make sure that those two departments were ready when the schools got back to normal. So we had to allocate some of the funding there, mainly for I will go back to the details, but this was mainly to make sure that the departments were ready when we went back to normality. We also had to allocate some of the fund for the small and informal businesses, and this was mainly for the support that was provided by different departments, such as Department of Tourism, Department of Small Business, and also Department of Trade and Industry. We also allocated some of the funds or moved funds there. And we also have support to public entities of about 6 billion, and there were other COVID interventions amounting to about 1.7 billion. As you were maybe aware, honorable members, we're also proposing an allocation for land bank of 3 billion, but we also have what we call in the budget provisional allocation for fiscal relief. This money, basically, honorable members, is the money that will be available this year, for most of it for the employment program that was announced by the president. The reason why this money is not yet allocated to any department is because we are still working with the presidency and the line departments that will be involved in providing the service, because what we looked at was, is there a possibility to use the mechanism that already exists in the departments and enhance those so that they can implement what the president has announced, instead of starting from new or having new programs. So the reason why is a provisional allocation is that we're finalizing the paperwork, we're finalizing the targets with the different departments, and this money will be allocated by October 2020 in the MTBPS. So this money exists and it will be spent. We're just making sure we're finalizing the paperwork. These honorable members and chairperson, the slide just shows you where the suspensions were and the downward reductions. I will go through this as and when I go through the different departments. So this is a summary of what was budgeted for according to function classification, honorable members and chairperson. So basically, the most important part of this slide is that for most of these functions, there were increases in their allocations. The only one where there was a decline in their allocations will be departments that fall within the economic development function group. About 7 billion was reduced, but also learning and culture, there was a 13 billion reduction, but most of this is made out of the 8 billion where it was a 4-month skills development levy holiday. So it's not that we've reduced more for learning and culture. This is mainly that 8 billion that explains the lower or the negative amount in learning and culture. So, honorable members and chairperson, this slide gives you the department that had the most suspensions in terms of the net impact, and I'll just go through the departments quickly to give you an indication of what items we looked at. So the first one, honorable members, would be higher education and training, and as I said, the biggest one was the 8.1 billion of the skills development levy holiday, the 4-month holiday, but we also identified some of the infrastructure programs that can be postponed. This is close to $1 billion, but we also had to look at some of the possibility that we can delay some of the programs within the department, and one that we have identified would be delaying the historically disadvantaged institution development program and also the generation of academic program, and the delay will basically cost us about 383 million. But we also identified some of the non-essential goods and services given the COVID and also given the slowdown in economic activities, but also the department, we identified there were some places where they can delay in filling vacant positions, and that amounted to 316. But I think before I continue, Chairperson and honorable members, what I think is important is that these reductions are only for 2020 and they don't affect the 2021 baseline. So the reduction or the delay in filling vacant posts doesn't mean that next year they won't be able to fill those vacant posts. It's just that for this year, given the slowdown in economic activity and COVID, this money won't be spent, but it doesn't mean we're going to be reducing their budget because of these particular reasons. And we also looked at the TVET colleges, and we realized that we can identify about 155 million, and this mainly comes from delaying the operationalization of new colleges and deferring some of the intakes for the Center of Specialization program for 2021 academic year. Then we looked at transport, honorable members and chairperson, where basically the total downward revisions was 11.3 billion, but of that amount, 6.7 billion was reallocated to the Department of Transport. And how we found the net change is that we reduced the taxi recapitalization program, or the scrapping out of the taxes, and there we've identified 250 million. But the implication of this, of course, would be that it will reduce the number of taxes that will be scrapped in this year. We also looked at the different grants that exist within the transport department, and the 3.7 billion mainly will result in delaying some of the construction project through or that exists within these grants. But we think that the impact won't be as significant because already in June we're still on level 3 of lockdown, so the economic activity is still a bit slow. We continue to see underspending in the capital projects in PRASA, honorable chairperson, and we've identified that 1 billion can move from PRASA given the fact that we're still seeing some of the slowdown in economic activities, and this is the same as SANRAL because we identified about 1.1 billion where we delay some of the planned construction program. But what is a new allocation in terms of the Department of Transport, honorable chairperson and honorable members, is that there was a 1.135 billion that was allocated to a taxi relief fund, and this was a new allocation because this didn't exist before, and this money is its purpose is to assist the taxi industry, given the fact that they can't operate at full capacity and they were also impacted by COVID-19. There were other entities, honorable members and chairperson, that were affected by COVID and where their revenues declined considerably. And these are the 5 entities in the transport sector that we have identified, and this will be the money that we're proposing that the committee considers favorably so that we can save the entities from a full collapse, because this is not because the entities were not managed, but this mainly was because of the implication of COVID and slow economic activity. Then, honorable members and chairperson, we basically looking at the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, where the revisions that we identify is about 3.3 billion, but almost 1 billion of that was reallocated to the department, but there's a net change of about 2.4 billion, and this is made out of the suspending some of the vacancies where we have identified about 3 million will assist, and then we're also proposing that there will be a scaling down on some of the infrastructure programs because of the restricted economic activities, but we allocated funds for the deeds trading account because the entity was basically impacted by COVID. So these are some of the areas where the 2.4 billion was identified. The Department of Human Settlement chairperson, the revision was 5.5. The revision was 5.5 billion, and 3.2 billion of this was reallocated to the department. And the net change that was identified that could be moved from the department is about 2.3 billion, and this is mainly delaying the planned projects, especially looking at the 3 grants, which is the Human Settlement Development Grant, the Urban Settlement Development Grant, as well as the Title Deeds Restoration Grant. But we also have new allocations where we've realized that the pressure is more on the social housing and affordable housing, but we also have an emergency housing grant. So most of this money was allocated to deal with the housing pressures that the department has identified. And honorable members and chairperson, now we're looking at the Department of Basic Education, where the revisions that were identified were 7.2 billion, but 5.2 billion of this was reallocated back to the department with the net change of 5.2 billion, and mainly the downward revisions will come from delayed or delays in planned projects, and especially for infrastructure grants. But the impact of this, honorable members and chairperson, looking at where we are currently, it's gonna be there, yes, but the impact won't be as significant because even now, most of these planned project will not be implemented because of slower economic activities. We also looked at some of the non-essential goods and services within the department, and also we looked at the budget for training, especially for math, science and technology, as well as life skills education. But as I said, this is mainly for this year, and these can kick in the years going forward. But we also allocated money for the school infrastructure backlog grants, but this is mainly because of a 600 million or reimbursement from the provinces that they given back to the Department of Basic Education. For the Department of Trade and Industry chairperson and honorable members, downward revision was 3.2 billion, but we allocated 500 million of this with a net change of about 1.8 billion. And this is mainly coming from suspending of incentives for this year, but also we've identified some of the non-essential goods and services within the department. But what the department has proposed for the committee for consideration would be a 500 600 million that they have allocated, and this is mainly to assist the distressed firms, and this will be in a form of a loan. So we are proposing that this be granted. But you also have the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, where their net change is about 1.6 billion, and basically most of this money comes from the reduction in the bulk infrastructure and household connection, which is referred to as INEP. And from that program, we identified 1.5 billion that can be moved to another department. And we're looking at science and technology, where the net change is about 1.4 billion, and mainly this comes from non-essential goods and services in the department, but also in their public entities, close to $1 billion. But we also think that we're proposing they can reschedule the construction of the square kilometer array of about 359 million, but also the National Integrated Cyber Infrastructure System, where we have identified 200 million, but this means they will just have to reschedule the construction of this. In the Department of Tourism, mainly the reductions there is just reprioritization from international and local marketing activities. The department has identified most of this, and I must say it was one department that supported the downward revisions because of the pressures that COVID has put in their own sector. And then, honorable members and chairperson, this is just the slide that gives. So I'm just going back to the slides I was discussing. I decided that I will present to you the net reductions for departments of over 1 billion, but the rest of the departments in the slides as an annexure within the same presentation. So it's not that we don't think they're significant, but because of the time pressures, we thought let us focus on the ones that have 1 billion and above as a net, but all the information for the departments is in the annexures, even those ones that did not have any reductions. So chairperson and honorable members, these are just the department that received additional funding, and I will quickly go through them. So the first one is Government Communication and Information System, where they have increased the advertisement of COVID and educational advertisement and most of adverts and interviews. And so they have been very busy communicating on behalf of government this COVID, and we realized that they budget is too limited for them to do what they're supposed to be doing. So we're proposing that you favorably consider the revision upwards for their department of 30 million. We're proposing that the department, or the Defense Department, because they announced that the deployment of troops will be up to September, I think, or the next 6 months. Defense will definitely need money to implement that. We're also proposing that in the National Health Department, an upward revision of 2.9 billion be considered favorably by the committee, and this is mainly targeted at things such as the COVID-19 lab test, the Cuban doctors that are here to support the rest of the sector. The department has been contracting with private hospitals to try and deal with the pressures. The department also had to spend money on PPEs as well as thermometers, but they also intensified their communications campaign and occupational health interventions. So these really we think that the 2.9 billion will sort of be sufficient, but we're asking the committee to consider this favorably. We're also looking at the police department, where the additional or the upward revisions were 3.7 billion. I must mention, chairperson and committee members, that most of these departments have done a lot of work in trying to identify some of the money within their baselines that they they can reprioritize towards this. And most of them managed to reprioritize some of the money, but at some point we realized that with the reprioritization within their baselines will not be sufficient for what they have to, or for the work that they have to do. So there was no department that was never asked to find resources within their baselines to try and deal with this. So if you look at some of these departments, the initial amount that they requested is less than what we're proposing the committee to consider, and mainly that is because we worked with the departments to find some reprioritization that reduced the money that they requested, and police is one such department, as well as the Defense Force. Honorable members and chairperson, for the National Treasury, the upward revision was 9.3 billion, and this is mainly because of the much higher debt servicing cost, because of the fall in revenue and the cost of borrowing, which is 7.2 billion higher for this year. But as you may be aware, the 3 billion was also allocated to the National Treasury's budget for the recapitalization of the land bank. We also had to the president announced support to municipalities, and the budget for the Department of Cooperative Governance we're proposing that it must be upwardly revised by 11 billion so that they are able to assist the municipalities that are having pressure of revenue because of COVID, but also the Department of Social Development, where the support for the vulnerable household, we're proposing that their budget be revised by, or upwardly revised by 25.5 billion. Honorable members and chairperson, you might ask why 25, not the 50 that was announced by the president initially. So what happened was that when COVID started, or when the lockdown was announced for the end of March 2020, the president announced that to deal with congestion, the social grants for April will be paid much earlier. So in March, we paid half of the social grants. So that meant that the Department of Social Development will overspend in 2019-20 financial year, but it gave them about 15 billion of money that they didn't have in 2020-21. So this 15 billion, we left it in the Department of Social Development. We didn't take it out, and we adding, this is in addition to the 15 billion. But what we also had to do was we looked at the numbers of intake, the numbers of applications, and where we are at the current moment. And when we looked at the numbers, we realized that the Department of Social Development will be able to continue dispersing the funds as announced by the president, but because of the lower than expected uptake, it meant that they can still achieve the same amounts for qualifying people, but that is not going to cost us the 50 billion as we initially estimated, but it's going to cost us around 40 billion. So we continuously work with the Department of Social Development, and if by October we realize that we need to revise the numbers upwards, we will definitely revise the numbers upwards. So this allocation doesn't mean if social development runs out of money, then they won't have money to implement. All it means that we estimated that it's going to be 50 billion, but when we look at the numbers and the uptake, we revise down the numbers. But if there's push in the October budget, adjustments budget, that we increase allocation for social development to achieve the same thing, then certainly we will do that. So this doesn't mean we're changing what the president has announced. This is just more of an estimate given an updated set of numbers. Honorable members and chairperson, the other issue that we are bringing into your consideration, and we hope that you will be able to consider this favorably for the Minister of Finance, is what we refer to as Section 6 of the Appropriations Act. So basically this section, honorable members and chairperson, it enables the Minister of Finance to approve expenditure which cannot reasonably be delayed without negatively affecting service delivery. And this basically ranges between unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, and most of this would be announced by the Minister of Finance during the February budget speech. So basically what happens here is that every time when we have an appropriation bill, there will be this section that allows the Minister of Finance to announce some of the spending that he might we might incur, but we're still working on finalizing things, or we don't know yet what the cost of this spending is going to be. So basically what we have done is that we did put these numbers in the 2020 budget, and the provisions basically included what we call a contingency reserve of 5 billion, but also there was another amount there which was provisionally allocation of about 7 billion. And the reason why you would have amounts that are provisionally allocated is that departments you may find that departments are still working on costing these projects or costing the expenditure. So it wasn't finalized, and in the system you will put it as a provisional allocation. But what happened this time, Chairperson and honorable members, is that most of the times when we put these provisional allocation funds, the minister has up to October to basically distribute the funds. But what we saw this time around is that the Appropriations Act was enacted on the 23rd of June, and this new adjustments budget was tabled on the 24th of June, which was the following day. So once we tabled this adjustment appropriation to the National Assembly, it meant that it supersedes the previous act. So the minister can't really use Section 6 anymore. So basically what we're asking the committee is to help us adjust the adjustment appropriation bill in such a way that it enables the minister to still use Section 6 so that we can still allocate the contingency reserve and also the provisionally allocated funds. Chairperson and honorable members, what we are asking for is not something that is going to change the fiscal framework, is not something that is going to change the division of revenue bill, and it's certainly not what is going to change the adjustments appropriation bill. It's just a clause in the adjustments appropriation bill that will enable the minister to use some of the funds that are provisionally allocated. So it doesn't change the content of these bills, but what it does, it enables the minister to use Section 6 to allocate funds that were announced in the 2020 budget review. Chairperson, thank you so much. May I just ask my colleague, Dr. Roy Haveman, to quickly take us through the credit guarantee scheme. Thank you. Roy?
Thank you very much, Dr. Modise. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the credit guarantee scheme, as you know, was launched as part of the President's initiative to provide 500 billion in support to the economy. The take-up was initially quite slow. So in the first week, the cumulative applications were about 1,800 only, and only about 1.4 billion in loans were approved. That said, take-up has been rising, and by this week 7, we've had 35,700 applications received. So far, 8,500 have been approved, totaling 11.7 billion, and the average loan is about 1.4 million. There are still 13,000 applications being considered, and of those that were not approved, just under 10,000 did not meet the bank's risk criteria, and about 3,600 were not eligible. So we were quite concerned about the slow take-up of the scheme, and we've had a lot of engagement with different stakeholders, the Black Business Council, the a lot of different small entities and some DFIs even, to identify what the reasons were for the slow take-up and to see if we could make changes to the scheme. So if we go to the next slide, so just go on to the next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. We also had a look at if the scheme was being successful in reaching particularly smaller businesses. I think there was a lot of concern that larger businesses would take up the scheme and that small emerging businesses were not able to access the scheme because there was a lot of paperwork involved and there are a lot of issues. So we've done an analysis of where the majority of the loans have gone. And you can see, Chair and members of the committee, that about 54% of the loans are to companies with a turnover of 1 million and 2 million. So that's the number of loans. But if you look at the value of loans, about 34% have gone to this band 2, which is loans turnover between 1 million and 20 million, and a further 22% have gone to firms between 20 million and 50 million. So the majority of loans seem to be going to relatively small firms, and we can see that also by the size of the average loan, which is only 1.4 million. So this suggests that the scheme is at the moment reaching the target market of small emerging companies. We are still concerned that obviously a lot of the loans were rejected as a result of banks' credit criteria, and we were also quite concerned about the low amount of demand for the scheme. So we just go to the following slide. These are the reasons why we have identified why the credit guarantee scheme had a bit of a slow take-up. Most interestingly, there appears to be quite a low demand for loans right at the moment. Most companies have preferred to restructure their existing debt, and this is because the Reserve Bank provided substantial regulatory relief. So they've allowed companies to delay interest payments. Banks have allowed companies to pay smaller amounts on interest, and there've been a whole range of other initiatives that customers have been able to use with their banks. And this is partly because the Reserve Bank provided quite a lot of regulatory relief as part of the 500 billion rand package. And we estimate that actually approximately about 10% of all loans in the country have used one of these mechanisms to restructure their debt. There also has been a delay because a number of companies, from what we gather, have been waiting for further guidance on what's going to happen with the lockdown. And so as we go down the lockdown levels, more and more people have been applying. So if you recall, we actually introduced the product in level 5, and lots of companies were just simply not able to open and function at level 5. When we went to level 4, there were more applications, and now at level 3, there are actually even more applications. And that has been one of the reasons why we've actually changed the design to allow for what we call a business restart option. Then the banks also imposed normal credit practices, despite us being in emergency times. And that was particularly at the start of the scheme where they didn't necessarily, their systems and stuff weren't ready. A lot of that has changed. There were a lot of concerns about the personal surety requirement, and small firms often pay salaries as drawings. So if you're a sole proprietor, so you basically run a very small company, you don't pay yourself a salary, you pay yourself what you call drawings. And initially, drawings were not allowed to be used, and so a lot of people did not want to apply for the scheme. And the third big reason for the delays has been that there are still quite slow turnaround times for approvals. So about 13,000 applications are still under consideration. The banks have done a lot of work to get their systems up and running, but initially all the applications had to be approved manually. And we've made some changes to make it easier for banks to make approvals. So if we go into the next slide, we've made quite a lot of changes, which will, a lot of the banks, as you probably saw in the business day today, have already made these changes to the scheme. This presentation is actually the formal, this, and the Minister is speaking on the budget vote speech in about half an hour. And that's where we'll be formally announcing the changes to the scheme, and we will be putting out details of Q&A and all the details about it. But importantly, the big change has been that we are allowing business restart loans to allow businesses that are able to begin operating as the economy opens up. As I said before, what would happen previously is that firms in level 5 just simply didn't want to borrow more money. They were very worried about whether or not their businesses would be able to operate, how they'd be operate, and so forth. But obviously, as we've gone down the levels, more and more of the economy has opened up, and actually quite a substantial amount of the economy has opened up, with the big exception of hospitality and travel and tourism. Then the credit assessment criteria of the banks were still very strict in the beginning of the scheme. We've had a long negotiation in terms of trying to make sure that the credit risk assessment that they use is aligned with the emergency spirit and the object of the scheme. So they'll still use reasonable lending practices, but they are now going to be better at not requiring extensive documentation. For example, bank statements and audited financial statements. So one of the issues was actually quite interesting, which is that about a quarter of the loans went to companies that had never borrowed from their banks before. So these were small businesses that had actually had quite a good relationship with their bank. They had banked with their bank for a number of years, and they had a good cash flow, and they were actually reasonably successful companies, but they had never borrowed from their bank before. And they'd never had the need to borrow from their bank before. You can think of a lot of businesses that operate, cash in, cash out kind of businesses. So for these businesses, when they went to borrow for the first time, there was a lot of paperwork that was required. And so we have changed the paperwork requirements. Then clients can now access the loan over a longer period. Lockdown has extended quite a lot longer than everybody expected. And so the drawdown period has been extended to a maximum of 6 months. So let's say, for example, just to use a simple example, you borrow a 6 million rand loan, then you can draw down on that loan over 6 months at R1 million a month. The interest and capital repayment holiday has been extended, and that's also been extended to 6 months. So, for example, if you borrowed 6 million, you can draw it down at R1 million a month for 6 months, as I said. But now repayments are now only due 6 months after your last drawdown. So let's say you took out the loan in January, you've got 6 months of drawdowns, which takes you to June. You then have another 6 months of not having to make any repayments. And so your repayments are now only required from the 13th month. And that's actually a year. So, 12 months would take you to December. The 13th month is January. So if you started to drawdowns in January, February, March, April, May, June, that's 6 months. Then the next drawdowns are the next 6 months, July, August, September, October, November, December. Then you only have to repay the loan start repaying the loan in the following January. This will hopefully give businesses a lot more flexibility. Then on the following slide, we've also the turnover requirement was quite a problem, and that's because lots of companies were struggling to calculate their turnover. Many companies' turnover has fallen quite a lot, and some companies, for example, are part of a group, and so then you have very complicated calculations. Also, the time period of the turnover calculation was quite complicated, and now we've said that you can borrow up to 100 million. Although, as I said, actually the take-up has been more around the R1 million mark. The test for good standing has been made easier. A lot of companies gave feedback to us and said that they were already in distress in February of 2010 because the virus was already going around the world and the economy was already in bad shape, and so they were not in good standing then. So we've now made the good standing test a little bit earlier, on the 31st of December, and given the banks a bit of discretion. And then, as I said, we've explicitly included sole proprietorships. These are are the types of firms that I think are really who we're trying to meet or trying to help, is small businesses that really just want to borrow. But I think it's really important that we expect that the take-up for the scheme to rise now, because as we're going down into more and more lockdown, lower levels of the lockdown, you can expect that more businesses will want to start opening up and will need money to restart. So, for example, if you take the case of a restaurant that previously had to be completely closed and wasn't even allowed to operate, now they are allowed to do takeaways and so forth. They might need a loan to help them buy a motorbike or to refit the kitchen to allow for takeaways. Many companies have changed their business models. So I've even heard of stories of small gin distilleries that used to make gin and they now make hand sanitizer. And people are doing like very clever and innovative things to try and make money during this very difficult time. And the idea is that they can now borrow from the scheme to do this sort of business restart option. So, Chair and committee members, I think that takes me to the end of my presentation on the changes to the loan guarantee scheme.
Mampo?
Thank you, Chairperson. That's us from the National Treasury team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Team Treasury. Secretaries, do you have the names of the oral members who like to speak?
Yeah. Hello, Chairperson.
Yes.
Lubabalo this side.
Okay, Lubabalo.
The first member is Honorable Ryder, Chair.
Okay.
Honorable Kaiso.
Kaiso.
Honorable Sarupan.
Sarupan.
Let me see. Honorable Joseph. I think that's all for now, Chair, unless I'm missing the other members, Chair. I think that's all for now.
Honorable members, I see Honorable Mlenzana.
Oh, Honorable Mlenzana, yes. Honorable Mlenzana is just indicated now. Honorable Okamp.
Honorable Okamp.
Yes, Chair.
Honorable members, Honorable Eunice.
Honorable Karim, yes.
Any other honorable member?
Honorable Karim is the last member to indicate, Chairperson. Maybe we might take this one as the first round. I don't know, but it's your decision to take, Chair.
Now let me check. Are the honorable members who would like to shout at me? I've got Honorable Ryder, Kaiso, Sarupen, Joseph, Mlenzana, Okamp, and Yunus Karim. So if perhaps we're not able to get into the chat box, is there anybody that we would have left out, would like to interact?
Honorable Chair, thank you. Jadu.
Oh, Honorable Jadu, welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm co-chairing with you here. I'm on your decided to take your seat. Honorable Jadu. Who else? Please shout at me. Any other honorable member? No. Honorable members, let's see what time we have. Can we try 3 minutes, please? Honorable Ryder, you will start.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I note that Treasury took 4 minutes less than they were given, so I might steal some of their time if that's okay. Thank you for the presentations. I'll be quite quick. First question relates to Ms. Modise, please. I note that between 32 and 46% of departments' non-compensation budget is going to be reduced. I think, look, that's a massive chunk, and there's two questions that come out of that. So number one is, what is the cost of that temporary suspension? Because a lot of projects are going to get put on hold. Contracts are going to have to be extended. There's going to be perhaps legal issues around contracts that are not adhered to, etc. What's the cost of that is the first question. The second question, and the real one, the big one, is that this indicates that zero-based budgeting is now imperative. Departments are having to put 50% of their projects basically on hold. This makes should make zero-based budgeting a lot easier, because now we can really have a look at what's essential and what is not. Can you just give us an update about zero-based budgeting? What are the timeframes that Treasury is looking at, and the expectations in terms of that? That's question one. Question two relates to the fiscal relief that was showed on slide 8. There was a 19.5 billion rand amount that was shown there. I'd like to get more information on that. 3 billion for the land bank. Is that out of that 19 billion? In addition, is this where the minister is going to be tapping into to assist SAA, or are there other priorities that are being looked at in terms of this fiscal relief of 19.5 billion? The next thing I just wanted to touch on relates to the Section 6 comments from Dr. Modise, relating to giving the minister more powers. I think if there wasn't such a trust deficit with cabinet at the moment, I think we'd be more open to this. But the reality is that and the minister's on record saying it himself, that economic principles are secondary, if secondary, probably even tertiary things taken into account at the moment for prioritization of funds and so on. So I think, I would be most reluctant to give the minister powers that he can do things without referring first to Parliament, specifically because I think that the wrong guiding forces are currently guiding spending patterns. Moving quickly on to Dr. Roy Haverman's presentation, the 10,000 that did not meet the risk criteria initially, will those now be reevaluated now that the criteria are being relaxed slightly, is my first question. And then the second question, you spoke about a lot of people that had never borrowed money before and that were now looking to borrow money, they had good cash flows, etc., etc. Those guys would have been able to access loan funding from the banks anyway. Now the banks are getting guarantees, government guarantees to assist them further. So it seems to me that the banks are being extremely favored in this regard. And I was wondering if there was pricing for risk. So if the pricing for those advances had been adjusted downwards because of the much reduced risk, not only on those ones where they qualify already, but also across the board where government is providing guarantees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ryder. Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate for the presentation made by Treasury. Chair, let me start with this one before ones forget, because I think it's very important. The issue on the Section 6 submission or the request made by the Minister, that I think it's very proper that we accede to this adjustment to the bill, appropriation bill, because I understand it to be already a matter which was actually included from the onset, but due to technicalities not included, I don't think it should be a problem. It should be something that we then allow it to happen, because look, as we move forward, our main concern is to provision of service delivery to our people. So it will be very a disadvantage for them not to get a service delivery as things unfold moving forward, because of we forgot to include something. So I think that as a committee, we should allow the minister to proceed with the request that amendment should be made to include it as per the request of Section 6. And where I want to go to now is an issue that was mentioned by Dr. Mpo on the postponement on the infrastructure programs. Unless maybe one is being informed exactly which programs are we referring to. Why? It is because infrastructure development actually is at the center of, the development of the economy. So I just want to know what actually are you referring to? Which programs are you referring to there, so that at least I'm quite clear what necessitated that move. And secondly is on the issue of food security. My understanding is that our population largely, you remember that a large population of our population is living under poverty according to Stats South Africa. So when we talk about food security, I would really ask the Treasury to look into that matter very sensitively, because it's one that really affects a sizable portion of our population in the country. Now, let me pause. I think I'm enough now, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Sarupen.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chair, let me start with the amendment to Section 6. According to the correspondence received by the committee, the Finance Minister is asking the committee to amend the bill. It's not a technical amendment, it's a substantive amendment that the committee needs to do. That was the correspondence says. Now,
apologies, Chair. Apologies, Chair. May you please remind Honorable Sarupen to activate his camera?
Honorable Sarupen, you know how we do it. Want to see you?
Yes, I realize that, Chair, but if I turn it on, my bandwidth issues out here is for that you won't hear my voice.
Okay,
My apologies for that, Chair. I struggle with connectivity where I stay. Chair, so just with regards to Section 6, as the committee is being asked to make this amendment, and that's fine, but the slide shows that they're adding an 11 billion, an additional 7 billion to the 5 billion for the contingency reserve. Now that 12 billion looks suspiciously like the amount that SAA needs. And I think we need to get some clarity as to what exactly is the intention of this amount. The minister is committed to not using any emergency funding for South African Airways. I think it would be morally questionable in the middle of a pandemic and a crisis to use that money for South African Airways. So I would really like to get clarity as to what it is that the intention is. In the letter to yourself, Chairperson, the Finance Minister says that this in the past was used for funding SABC and Denel. And there is a legal opinion that using the contingency reserve for bailouts is not legal, but it has been a problem, Chair. So I want some clarity on that and what exactly is the intention of these amounts and why it's being increased to 12 billion. Because that looks suspiciously like the amount that SA needs. Then with regards to the business credit guarantee schemes and loans, Chairperson, I'd like to find out from Treasury what attempts they're making to help small businesses and sole proprietors and small Black-owned businesses and many of these firms that cannot afford all of the regulatory compliance that we have in this country around auditing and accounting and so on. That really hurt small business. You'll find that most of their tax affairs are not in order. And as a consequence of their tax affairs not always being in order, they probably don't even meet the turnover requirements to have too much tax burden. But they will not be able to access any funding, and that becomes a problem for them, Chair. So I'd like to know what they're doing with SARS to ensure that these businesses can become tax compliant to access loans as well. That's my contribution today, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Joseph.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the department for the presentation. I just would like to ask, the DG said that the committee has the power to change the budget of the department. I just wanted to know, and I know in end of February or March, we were briefed on the process. I think I would like to go back to that documents in terms of what is the 10 points requirements to change this committee to change the budget, and I'm not sure whatever has happened in whether this committee has ever changed the budget as proposed by National Treasury, but we will deal with that in preparation for the October adjustments. My second point, Chairperson, is the National Treasury said they need to follow the president.
honorable members. Are we still muted?
Yes. Chairperson,
Joseph?
National Treasury said they need to follow the President's announcements. Otherwise, the President announcements, the stimulus package or relief fund. And I would like to know if the President consult with National Treasury. I'm sure the President does, and is it a standing procedure? I just want clarity, clarity on that. Chairperson, there was reference made to the Cuban doctors. I would like to know that amount that I think is an upwards amount under the 9.3 billion, because the provinces have received, all provinces, the doctors, but I understood with the previous presentation, the accommodation, the meals, the transport is not covered. So I would like to know this amount that National Treasury referred to now for the Cuban doctors, if that money will go to the provinces to cover the additional cost, or the cost that wasn't initially mentioned up front, if it's for that. Then on slide 22, I would like to know the 3 billion recapitalization to the land bank. The land bank is a state-owned entity, so I just want to know if that money is going straight to the land bank, or if it goes to the department first and then get channeled to the land bank. I just want the clarity on that. And then slide 22, the 11 billion to municipalities. I would like to know if the National Treasury has the capacity to monitor that money, or if they will call in for some assistance like the AG to follow that money, for COVID-19 money specifically, so that we should make sure it gets to the right places and is value for money. I share my colleague Sarupen's point on slide 23 on section 6, that 5 billion constituency, I reserve funds, I understand it's there, but the 7 billion provisional allocation funds, my question is also, does the minister have in mind between now and October to fund SAA? It's better to be upfront if it's a no or a yes, that we know where we stand. And then my last point, Chairperson, slide 29, the sectors that was mentioned that is still closed due to COVID-19, tourism, hospitality, and so on. I would like to know what percentage of the market it represents, although the economy is opening up and there's progress there, but I would like to know what is the percentage to the market, and then I would like to know if there are interest to be paid on these repayments, the companies that go to the bank for guarantees or loans. I'd like to know if they have to pay interest back on that money. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Joseph. You were serious on injury time, but I know that I've banked some of your minutes from previous meetings. It's fine.
Thank you.
Honorable Lenzana.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Let me welcome the presentation by Team Treasury, led by the Deputy Minister. Chair, let me start where it looks like everybody has to touch. On the Section 6 amendment of Act 7 of 2020. Chair, two things here. One, I literally refused to be legalistic in approach after receiving this communication in terms of the deleting and addition and all. All I was interested in were two issues, which fortunately Dr. Mampo addressed. That one, will all this have financial implications? And she responded to that as saying no. Then the other question that I had in mind was, does this have in any way not tampering with the rands and cents of the Division of Revenue Bill? And she also touched on that by saying no. And then therefore, I had no reason of refusing. But Chairperson, there is a day when one would address this question of individuals or political parties which want to co-run the state together with the ruling party. That one is on its own. Chair, let me quickly go to, let me welcome, Chair, the upward revision of comparative governance, that 11 billion. But my question to the DG and Team Treasury would, is this 11 billion covering the special COVID-19 audit? I'm asking this, Chairperson, knowing fully well that this question of AXA, that is the Auditor General of South Africa, having to set aside time and energy to audit whatever COVID-19 related expenditure will have to be done. It shouldn't be rhetoric. But I doubt if the Auditor General of South Africa is ready financially to take care of that. Then the last two, it's just a question, this one to the DG. My interest on the compensation of employees. I didn't hear them talking about that. Is it covered? Won't we see a bombshell? Then the last one, Chair. This 1.135 billion on tax relief. What's the need, Chair? Is it still relevant in the light of the current regulations regarding the tax industry? I will talk more about this if I had time, but let me just stop there. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mlenzana. Honorable Ockham.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, yeah, on slide 15, I would just like to ask Dr. Modise, we are looking there at CASP, the Comprehensive Agricultural Support Program that's being, well, it's the project of 317 million rand has been suspended. And just a further bit down, you see that food security, the food security program of 611 million rand has also been suspended. I think we need to really look at why that happened. We are sitting in a time where we know that 50% of the people in our country are going to experience some sort of food shortage. And maybe it is going to be wise to look into enabling people in South Africa to provide food for themselves, especially if you look at CASP and especially if you look at the whole issue surrounding food security. I agree there with the Honorable Kwayiso. We need to look at that. People need to be able to provide food for themselves. And at this stage, this is a real concern, especially in the looking at the fact that we do not know when this pandemic will end, and we do not know how it will in the future negatively still have an effect on the lives of people. Honorable Chairperson, regarding slide 21, it's just a big concern that defense's budget is up with 2.9 billion, exactly the same as health. Now, we know that the defense budget is up due to the deployment of 70,000 soldiers onto our streets. But isn't that a distrust in the people of South Africa that we need to police them or need to have soldiers out there to see that they are adhering to all these COVID requirements, whereas those monies could have much better been applied at the health level to ensure that we save lives and that we start to trust our people. Then, Honorable Chairperson, on slide 22, it just brings me back to what Dr. Mampo Modise told us when she spoke to us, I think it was early in June. Her opening statement started with the words, "We are in trouble." Now, if you look at 7.2 billion rand for additional debt service costs, it's higher with 7.2 billion rand. And that brings us to why we can't have money injected in much serious matters, such as food security, such as our health. Because of the fact that we have done things wrong in the past, we are now paying the price for additional costs on our debt, and we need to look at that. I want to also add on to what the Honorable Staropen has said with SAA. It does look very suspicious, and we need to get those answers straight and direct so that we know what's going on and that we can prevent this. I do not believe that contingency reserves can be used for bailouts, and we must, as a government and as a committee, we must make that clear to everybody out there. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Okam. Honorable Karim.
Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, our research unit has done a report. In fact, there's 3 different permutations of it. It was sent to us at 12 minutes past 10. At least that's when I got it, and I think the Select Committee did. I think, Chairperson, with the permission of the majority in the committee, we should require National Treasury to respond when they do next week. Not just to what the public has said, but also what our researchers have said, because they've highlighted a whole lot of issues and questions that the committee should raise with Treasury. And we don't get the time often to do that, and it's difficult when you get it at 12 minutes past 10, though, you know, I understand the pressures they're under. So I think they should reply to those issues, because the poor parliamentary research unit advisors spend many hours, and then, you know, the report gets glossed over. Secondly, everybody from the far left to the far right, far left to the far right, and no less a personage than the former editor of Business Financial Times, Financial Mail, sorry, said the other day that infrastructure is the key to our economic recovery. It's always been there as that, but it's even more the case now. So the question we keep asking is, yes, we understand the difficulties. Who can tell what's right in this age of uncertainty, this age of volatility, right? So, you know, it's not like sitting here, holier than thou. I don't really know, Comrade Chair, what the answers are and who does. But surely Treasury should give us a better explanation for why key aspects of infrastructure have been forgone when they're so crucial to economic recovery and job creation. So perhaps, you know, up till now, it's the 3rd time I'm bringing this question in some form or another. Kaiso brought it up right now. Can they give us a clear answer, Chairperson? What is it? What organizing principle or value do they use in deciding on the trade-offs, which are difficult, as I stress? Then the issue of even economic stimulus. Yes, I understand. We all do, I'm sure, to differing degrees. They had to give money to health, education, SADF, and police and so on. They took away money from agriculture, for example, though the good thing is 3 billion go to the land bank. So, you know, again and again, it's actually, it's not just service delivery, it's economic stimulation and job creation that's at issue, difficult as it is. Then on BIG, basic income grant. In the fiscal framework, we say, taking into account, something to the effect, taking into account the budget constraints, National Treasury should consider making a BIG permanent. Now, it was couched in diplomatic language, but the effect of it is the ANC at least supports that. And I think, you know, the PBO, somebody just alerted me to that in an exchange, actually. The PBO should look into this, Comrade Chair, in preparation for the adjustments budget in October. Is it feasible from the side of Parliament? What do we think and so on? Then on the issue of the loan guarantee scheme, well, there seems to be some progress, though interestingly, COSATU and the DA yesterday, you know, Chairperson, wrote to us to ask for a fuller account of this. Now, you know, from what Roy is saying, it seems progress has been made, but I'm not able to tell at this stage how much of that. Perhaps COSATU will respond to that, and whoever wants to tomorrow, and then they can come back to us on Tuesday, because, Chairperson, I'm not very clear, though there does seem to be progress, how much of that is enough, in other words. Then on the Section 6 matter, it's simple. If the legislation allows for it, which we've passed, we have to accept it. If the legislation doesn't allow for it, the Legal Services Unit will say Section 6 can't be introduced in this form. Finally, you know, I understand Mr. Alkam's reservations about money going to the SADF. I understand that. It makes a lot of sense when you've got other pressing considerations. But, Chairperson, we should also be a bit careful about what we're saying here. Nobody supports the SADF and police abuses. Nobody is saying people are not to be trusted. But it's a class issue, which takes a racial form mostly, as you know, Chairperson, which is that it's easier for us middle classes, whoever we are, either black or white our skins are, who can manage a lockdown. If you're living in an informal settlement or you are 10 people in a house, how do you observe the lockdown? So it's managing the process, which is why I think the SADF has a role, not the role that some of them are playing. None of us endorses that. Finally, it's tiresome, Chairperson. Maybe one day we need an education on this. All over the world, in the established democracies, no least in the US, ministers squabble about budgets allocated to each other. The divisions are inevitable in a democracy. There's nothing wrong with it. Perhaps we have too many of it. But it's not as if the government doesn't operate with some degree of cohesion. It's not as if ministers have their own say. Ultimately, the president accounts for the budget. Maybe we need to educate our members so we don't get this bleating like sheep, that actually look at all the divisions and they are misguided. What guiding? The wrong people are guiding. What wrong people? Ultimately, despite the divisions, there's one Minister of Treasury and there's one president who ultimately accounts for the budget. I think we need a discussion on how budgets are handled all over the world, not least within the Republican Party, with all its myriad divisions. Right now, it's the party that the DA, for the most part, not all of them, identifies with, even if they don't like Donald Trump. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Karim. I've just written to you. I'll start with Honorable Ryder. I said I would like to give you a minute if you still have something pending that would like to ask National Treasury. Honorable Ryder.
Chair, I'm too busy laughing at Mr. Karim's assertions, but no, I just wanted to agree with Mr. Karim and underline what he said about Treasury responding as well to the research document. I think it was a very valuable input. Chair, and I'm largely covered beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've covered what I wanted to, but just only want to stress on this issue of small, medium business enterprises. Through the call is to let us make sure that now there is a complete support for the small business development enterprises, because now our small emerging business and yeah, they need a lot of assistance during this difficult time. So I just want to believe that the Treasury would make sure that now those people are covered. The small business development enterprise is very, very much important, because I think it is a backbone of the poor people's economy that will suffer during this period. So we must make sure that now they are during this adjustment process they are well covered. Thank you very much, Chair.
Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Sarupen. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, my system wasn't unmuting. I'm perfectly happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Josephs.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the next opportunity. I just want clarity on the short-term relief grants, which Minister Zulu has announced on TV that the party ANC is considering it. I would just like to know from Treasury if they've been approached officially and what is their view on that proposal at the moment, which is still in the media. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Lenzana.
Thanks, Chairperson. Just one thing, Chairperson. Perhaps it will just to, clear the cloud for the South African listenership, lest people get confused. How far is this budget going, DG? Because we are now dealing with this budget, which is some kind of an emergency arrangement. Then we're getting to October, where there will be the medium-term budget statement. If that could be clarified, lest we mismatch the issues. I listened to some of my colleagues, the manner in which they are debating, Chairperson.
Done, Honorable Okam.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Two quick things. The first one is that seeing that the Honourable Karim is appropriating or is judging on which political parties we are supporting, I think we must be aware of the fact that he is supporting guys like Kim Jong-un from North Korea, and we must be very wary of that. Tongue in the cheek there, Honourable Karim.
Yeah, absolutely not true. He's a Stalinist.
Honourable Chair.
That's the last one. That's lovely. Good reply, Chairperson. Good retort.
Honourable Chairperson, just one quick question. While we are laughing on this, I would just like to find out from Treasury what communication channels there are between Treasury and the provinces. The reason why I'm asking that is when we dealt with the appropriation budget that we have just discussed yesterday again, it is clear that on the negotiating mandate that came from quite a lot of provinces, that the whole issue with regards to the drought is an extreme problem for them and is one high on the agenda. But if you look at what's going on in the budget, it doesn't seem that it has been addressed by Treasury and by government to alleviate the problems that the provinces have. It is clear that the provinces have got that problem. They have voiced that problem, but still nothing is being done. Does National Treasury think that there's enough communication on all levels, with special regard with this? That will obviously come back to the point that I made earlier on with regards to food security. If we can have more help for our farmers and farming communities, our upcoming farmers, we will have a better amount of food security in our country. Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Karemia, are you coming in? No?
No, I really liked Mr. Willie Alkam's retort, but beyond that, no, I don't have anything to say.
You remember when former President Comrade Nelson Mandela was having that interview in New York with that journalist, when Madiba said, "Have I paralyzed you, Mr."
Yes, that was in '92, I think. Yeah.
Have I paralyzed you? And because the journalist says it looks like Honorable Karim, Honorable Okamp has just paralyzed you. Can we?
Yeah. Once and never again.
Honorable Njatu, I did communicate your frustrations about connectivity when you were supposed to be chairing together, but Honorable Njatu has just joined us, and can I allow him to interact with the presentation? Honorable Njatu, please come in.
No, Chair. I think I understood you to say that you're gonna give me if there's necessary. So I'm fine.
Are you good?
If I have to continue, it's also all right.
Okay. Thank you so much. Can I then come in? Again, let me thank Team Treasury for their presentation, a professional one, as always. Thank you so much, Dr. Mampo, and your team. Let me start by saying most of the time the problem that we have, we are in appropriations and we're always looking at the expenditure side of the budget. But as you know that the budget will always have got the income and the expenditure side. We spend little time on expenditure. The problem that the country is facing is economic growth, which will then translate to a number of other things, including better revenues and including better employment opportunities and so on and so forth. Now, in our interactions with the departments, we made this observation, Dr. Mambo, that we're spending so much money in the departments. But the problem is that some of the departments don't look at themselves as having the responsibility to grow the economy. They are looking at certain departments. From where we are seated, every department, everybody has got that responsibility. For instance, if you take, let me just quote what when we raised this issue with the Minister of Health, where we're saying that we continue importing a lot of these things, and we all know that everything that we import, when it comes to the GDP, it impacts the GDP negatively. It impacts our foreign reserves. That's also equal to exporting jobs. We said, using all this money, why are we still importing so much from countries like China and India and so on and so forth, building other economies, so to speak? That's one. Again, we also noticed, made a point dealing with the Department of Education, that so much of the stationery, the things that we use, we still import them. And definitely those things do not help our economies. And then we are saying that's an area again. But one of the things which came up is that some of our laws and legislation make it difficult for them to create an environment where we can localize our production. And we responded by saying, well, it is this parliament that makes laws. And I think the challenge to National Treasury is to identify those laws which make it difficult for us to stimulate the economy. We can't always be importing these things. They have got negative impact on a number of things that we are trying to do. So I'm just saying the conversation as to how we deal with growth, I think we've been very thin, and would like that the executive deal with that. And if there are things that us as legislators we need to do, let them be brought to us, because I think if there's one thing that we were in agreement, whether you support the president of North Korea or Trump, is that this country needs economic growth, and we need to keep the resources within the country as much as possible. So I think this is just the challenge. If there are legislations which impede that, let's also know about them and let them be brought to Parliament, because that's what we heard from the departments who are biggest consumers of our budget. I thought let me preface my input to that. And then let me rush to section 6. In the Appropriations Act, this section 6 thing was there, and nobody had a problem with it. So when it was brought to my attention, I asked a few questions. One, how does it impact on the fiscal framework? I said, no, it doesn't. The numbers are already there. 2, how does it impact on the Division of Revenue Bill, Amendment Bill? No, it doesn't. The numbers are still there. And how does it impact on the bill that we are busy with? As far as the rands and cents are concerned, it doesn't. The numbers are already there. So the political debates that our members are raising, well, there are political debates, but when I listened to Mampo, she said they are still working with the departments on a number of things as to exactly where will that money end up going to. So I think it would really be presumptuous of us again for her having said that they are still working out as to where this thing money is going to go to say she must tell us, whereas she said in her principal address that they are still working on the areas that this money may end up going to. What COVID-19 has done is brought a lot of unforeseen things. Nobody knew for certain that we'll have to make such big adjustments soon after we pass the appropriations bill. So to ask her, well, they may respond, but when I heard her, she said they are still working with the departments as to where exactly this money will go to. Having said that, can I just check the taxi scrapping program? Is it still there? How successful is it? Because I can see we're still busy with it. I haven't heard a lot about it. I think I really would like to join the honorable members who spoke about the reduction of 2.4 billion rand in agriculture. Food. In fact, I think there are statistics which have just come out recently, which was showing that levels of hunger are just increasing in our country. So it seems to be working against that. Instead of us getting more money to go there, we were decreasing. I think I'll definitely be challenging National Treasury and government to work on this one. When we come back with the MTBBS, I think they definitely need to correct this one. It's you can't have a country which is complaining of hunger, threatening food security in the whole country, and then we are decreasing. We have also heard farmers in general, both commercial farmers, emerging farmers, talking about the support that they need from government. I think one thing that we can't afford is for a country which can't feed itself. We may be lacking on many other things, but as far as us having to feed our people and feeding ourselves, I don't think it's a luxury that we can have. So National Treasury, I think we definitely need to relook at that. Mr. Haverman, can you please share with the committees the salient features of the credit guarantee scheme? What exactly? You spoke about how it's what it has done and so on, but can you please just share with the committee again the salient features of the credit guarantee scheme? With that, for whatever reasons that have been shared with us, it's very clear that the uptake on the credit guarantee scheme has been very slow. We have argued before that why don't we use other agencies? For instance, I spoke about some of the DFIs, Dr. Mpo, and some of the provincial development institutions to be given a portion of this credit guarantee scheme, so that they're also being able. For instance, one of the things which is happening, there are so many of these repayment holidays, but you find that the DFIs, people are getting the money from the DFIs, people are getting money from the development agencies, which are owned by government. They don't have this facility. So why don't we take a portion of it? Added to that, how much exactly is this credit guarantee scheme? I'll tell you, since we started with this process of appropriations, I've had 100 billion rand, I've had a 200 billion rand, I've had again a possibility of a 300 billion rand. Can we be taken on board exactly as to how much is the scheme? Honorable members, I think I would leave it at that and allow Dr. Mampo and the team. The time it's 2:15 to go, and you have got all the chance to be as extensive, not necessarily verbose unnecessarily, but to give us as much information as possible on the questions that the honorable members have asked. Dr. Mampo.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I'm waiting for my DG because he said he wanted to respond first. DG Mukhajani, please respond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Modise. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, Chair. Chair, I will just talk to four different points.
Sorry, DG. You have been too quiet and sort of pre-1994 underground. So you are welcome. Please come in.
No, thank you very much, Chair. And good afternoon, members of Parliament, the committee. There are 4 points I'm going to mention. I'll start with a question: where is the budget going? I think this, honourable members, is, as we say, is a supplementary budget. We are basically supplementing what we said in February, mainly because of the impact that COVID-19 brings to our space. So we said in the budget documentation that it's a bridge that we are creating towards the October budget, the medium-term budget policy statement. So it should be seen as that context. It's not in its entirety full in terms of what it's attempting to do. It's simply just adding on and subtracting and reprioritizing what some of the things that we said in February should be seen in that context. Number two, I think on the channels of communication, if there's one intergovernmental system that's functioning effectively in our space in the country currently, is a whole team finance arrangement. We engage with provinces on an ongoing basis. We've got structured discussions and structured meetings at the Technical Committee of Finance level, the National Treasury and 9 provincial heads of treasuries. And also we've got a very effective budget council that's functioning. And as you know, it's a body, the Budget Forum and Budget Council. These are bodies that are established in terms of the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act of 1997. So we are forced to engage, we are forced to talk on an ongoing on intergovernmental fiscal matters. So we do share a whole lot of discussion issues with provinces. Number three, Chair, in budgeting, there's a natural contradiction that is always there and that will always be there, which is on one hand, the ability to spend by spending agencies, and on one hand, the allocations that are or that should be made towards some spending items. So there's always that contradiction that we will allocate, but you find that the ability to spend is not there effectively. So as a result, we then are forced one way or the other to look the other way when departments ask or agencies ask for more requests to spend, but then in some cases we reduce where spending hasn't been finalized or spending programs have not been finalized. And that's why, and I'm not defending the reduction of the 2.4 billion. All I'm saying from agriculture, all I'm saying is that at a given point in time, you will find that irrespective of the need that we all are aware of, we will find that maybe there's a need where the capacity to spend is not there or the ability. So as a result, you are able to then take from one spending agency and give the other spending agency that is proving. But it's always not always a very clean and clear process because that natural contradiction in budgeting is always there. Number four, which is the last that I'll comment on, Chair, is the SAA. SAA, at the time of the budget, we did indicate that we are putting aside 16.4 billion rand to pay lenders or guaranteed debt, SAA debt, etc. So, and that's the only allocation that we've made available in this current financial year, including what we set at the supplementary budget. There's no other funding set aside apart from the 16.4 billion. What we are then doing now is essentially, and we did say this, by the way, Chair, at the time of the budget, and I want to quote page 62 of the budget review for honorable members to understand what we were saying. In page 62 of the budget review 2020, we said, and we're talking there provisional allocations. Provisional allocations are only confirmed once certain requirements have been met. In addition to provisional allocations to ESCOM, the 2020 budget includes provisional allocations of 7 billion in 2021, 1.9 billion in 21-22, and 3.6 in 2022-23. These allocations are mainly for financial support to South African Airways and road asset management for secondary and strategic road network. It does not mean, Chair, that these are over and above, as you indicated, Chair, in your intervention earlier. The fiscal framework, with the request of the Section 6 request that you're making, the fiscal framework is not increased. The fiscal framework and what we have provided for, the deficit does not increase. It's the same deficits that we outlined at the time of the supplementary budget. So the allocations that we are talking about here essentially is to ensure that we pay part of that 16.4 billion that is applicable to 2021 financial year. You will recall, Chair, and this is my last point on the same matter, that there was a time in December, December, when we requested allocations towards SAA, and we went to the DBSA, we got 3.5 billion rand. We also went to lenders, we requested 2 billion rand at the time. And over and above that, there was, and there's always been a 3.8 billion in year one, 2021, to repay debt. So if you combine all of that, there's the allocations and resources that we need to pay towards guaranteed debt, not to bail out SAA in any way that honorable members were suggesting now, but only to say that confirming that the 16.4 billion is the allocations that's made available at the time of the budget, and it's the same amount. So we are not in any way saying any other thing that is as a result of what we said in the budget. And the request then is to change the Appropriation Act of 2020 that's already passed. It's not a bill, as one of the honorable members was saying. It is an act that is already passed, and that's why we are requesting that it be changed to actually make provision for this request that you are presenting to. Thank you, Chair. I'll give it over back to Mampo.
Thank you, DG. Dr. Mampo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, DG. Just responding to some of the questions that I got. So the first question I want to respond to would be on slide 5. So just to clarify, the 42% of non-compensation budget and the 46 was just an indication of if we exclude these departments and we don't touch them, how much would we need to get to the 100 billion? So we didn't reduce the budget of the rest of the department, their non-compensation budget by 46%. What we were trying to show, honorable members, with slide 5 is basically that the way our budget is so not flexible, basically to find 100 billion if you exclude departments becomes even a much greater stress to deal with. And then a question on the ZBB and the time frames, the zero-based budgeting. What we are currently working on now is to work on a framework that we will present to the minister and cabinet. So this is still just a framework of basically what do we do between now and getting to a space where there's zero-based budgeting. What is it? How long will it take for us to implement? How do we see this being implemented? I mean, it was announced by the minister and approved by cabinet, but the conversations that we've been having with Parliament, it was very clear that Parliament would like to see this proposal before it is even implemented. So what we are currently doing now is trying to look at how do we implement this ZBB? Is it possible for us to consider looking at spending reviews to implement this? How long will it take? What are the cost implications? So honorable members and chairperson, what we are working on now as government is more of how can we design a concept note that can be used as a guideline to implement this. We have asked GTEC to assist us in putting together this concept note, but this is still something that we will present to cabinet for endorsement, and the minister will guide us on that. But this is what we're still working on. I think the DG has resolved the issue of the 19 billion, but on page 9 of the special bill, basically of the supplementary budget, what we say there is that precisely because we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last and we don't know the cost pressures yet, it would be unwise for Treasury not to have a buffer that we can use to deal with COVID. So the 19 billion is set aside precisely because there will be additional pressures, whether in terms of spending, whether in terms of job creation or preservation. We will still use that money for that. And it's really clear on page 9 on how we deal with that. I think the DG has resolved most of the questions on the section 6, but all I wanted to say here is that I know the DG has resolved all of that. So, honorable members, when I mentioned that the president announced that we're going to reprioritize 130 billion, basically everything that we have done as the Treasury and as the department, we presented it at cabinet. There were amendments that we were asked to look at, but what we are presenting to you, it is not a Treasury budget, but rather this is the budget that has been approved by the executive. So this was endorsed by cabinet. So, I mean, we work with the departments, we run a process with the departments, we present to cabinet, and then cabinet endorses it. So there's no different communication between the Treasury and the president and Treasury and cabinet. This is a cabinet budget that we're presenting. It's just that the Minister of Finance has the responsibility to present the budget to Parliament and to the nation. Another one, it was the question on how the money flows to the land bank. Because the land bank reports to the National Treasury, the 3 billion will be in the vote of the National Treasury, and the Treasury will then transfer those funds when the appropriation bill has been approved. Only then they can transfer the fund. But the Land Bank doesn't get its own line item from the national revenue. It's the same with all entities, honorable members. Even the money that was allocated to ESCOM through the special bill, it was allocated to the department because the minister and the DG of the department remain the accountable officers of that money that has been allocated. I agree, Chairperson, that we will respond in detail to the report that was prepared by your researchers, and we will submit that with the rest of the documentation. I'll ask Ulrika to respond on some of the transport questions. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mambo. Good afternoon, Chairperson and honorable members. So I'm going to answer questions related to some of the infrastructure and then on the local government, 11 billion rand. So just to answer the second part of Honorable Ryder's question that Dr. Modise didn't deal with in relation to the cost of temporary suspensions. So in relation to goods and services, a large chunk of the suspension is really as a result of the lockdown would have been expenditures that planned to happen that would not have happened. And that similarly would then apply for in the infrastructure space that with the hard lockdown in level 5 with no construction activity taking place, CapEx programs would then have started later, which means there is everything then gets pushed back by a month or two later, and then given the nature of the accounting in the national and provincial budgets, it created then space for us to then predict some kind of under expenditure on the budgets given the delay in the start of construction at the beginning of the year. So the cost of those temporary suspensions, at least in the short term, is negligible. Where they do have a significant impact would then be if this delays or the temporary suspensions are then are shifted into the medium term, and then what you really get with that is pushing infrastructure to later. So the cost of those suspensions then impact on contracts that run over time. It impacts on salaries and of workers who have been idle. But more importantly, I think that the long-term economic impact is that when you do delay maintenance or when you do delay CapEx programs in this way, they do become expensive later, and that's the trade-off that you're really making here. Is that so? For example, in roads, if we delay road maintenance by 1 to 3 years, the cost of fixing the road back to the initial standards would then be 3 to 5 times more expensive than what it was initially planned. Then this links also to Honorable Paiso's question on which programs do we refer to when we talk about the infrastructure that's being delayed. So specifically on vote 40, which is transport, it was the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant and the Public Transport Network Grant. We also have some suspensions for PRASA. This is partly related to PRASA sitting on large cash balances on its capital budget. So members of the Standing Committee on Appropriations will remember when we came with the fourth quarter expenditure of departments and the third quarter expenditure of public entities, we showed that PRASA was still sitting on significantly large cash balances as a result of failure to execute its capital program as planned. So we don't think a reduction on the PRASA budget would then reduce or would reduce any of the outcomes or the planned CapEx programs that they have going forward. And similarly, I mean, so what's happening with on provincial roads and national roads is really just a delay in the construction program due to economic activity that was limited. Then in relation to the 11 billion rand for local government that we've had from Honorable Josephs. So are we able to follow the money? So the money flows through the local government equitable share. And as you know, the local government equitable share is an unconditional grant allocation to municipalities. And if these things are going to be audited, which was Honorable Okam's question, this is, yes, it has to be audited. And the Auditor General has full capacity to audit this in the normal line of sight. So this is all appropriated money, sits within the mandate of the Auditor General to audit that. I think that's all from me. Thank you. Oh no, there is still one more on the taxi scrapping program. the chairperson's asked about. So the taxi recapitalization program is a relatively small program in the transport budget. This year, it's about so pre the adjustment that we are proposing here is about a 450 million rand program that largely underspends and underperforms. And this is partly because the program is demand based. So you need to get applications in from taxi operators. And the second is that the adjustments on the scrapping allowance hasn't necessarily changed to meet market expectations that would make it that it justifies for taxi operators to then come into the program. The Department of Transport has reviewed the taxi recap program, and as a result of that has made some proposals on adjustments to the scrapping allowance that would make it more market related and then bring more industry players into the program. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chairperson, members. I think on health and social development, there were just two very brief questions. The first was whether the 283 million for Cuban doctors is going to the provinces. So yes, that entire amount goes to provinces as part of the new COVID conditional grant or grant component. In fact, the full 2.9 billion additional allocation to health goes to provinces through that grant. And that new grant is created at a value of 3.5 billion. So that's for boosting healthcare for COVID in the provinces or across a range of interventions. Then just the other question on social development was, has the Social Development Department approached the Treasury yet on what might happen after the short-term relief grants in October? So no, they have not approached the Treasury yet. There have been no discussions to date with the Treasury on that. Thank you, Mampo. I think those are the chairperson. Those are the only questions I think of pertaining to these sectors. Thank you.
Mampo. Mampo.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, honourable members. I'm Rendani. I will only address one question in relation to an allocation made to the Defence Force. We must remember that the regulation provides for the mobilization or release of all the resources within the National Defence Force, some of which it's medical services through military health services. And in addition to that, we must also remember that we also have engineers within the National Defence Force. So the support to the police, if members of the public were complying with the regulation, the support to the police was going to be far less. But there are also these other capabilities within the National Defence Force. Like, for instance, at the moment, there are some water purification projects that are happening. The deployment of the doctors and the nurses within the provinces. They've already started in the Eastern Cape, and they are ready to be deployed all over the country. So I agree. If we were complying with the lockdown regulation, the allocation to Defence Force would have been far less, especially that part that supports the police. But again, we're also stepping up the border safeguarding. At the moment, we're expected to be in all the borders. So that's the area of which, that's another area that they're stepping up. But I agree, but if we're complying with the regulations, the support to the police was going to be far less than the allocation made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Randela. On the tourism, the contribution to GDP prior to the crisis, it was around 8%. The tourism sector was contributing around 8%, but you are anticipating that percentage to come down when the next set of numbers are released, because mainly the restrictions that were imposed by the lockdown, there were no activity. So we are likely to see, the falling of the contribution to GDP overall. So on the issue of agriculture, the reduction of 2.4 billion, we understand that that is a huge reduction, but our thinking was that given the lockdown, there are likely to be, limited economic activity. And also, if you look at some of the cuts, in the programs, they were mainly related to the infrastructure component of it. For instance, the agricultural colleges, the maintenance, and so forth. So because we understood that during lockdown, there were not going to be any maintenance done. Hence, you saw, a very increase or a big number in terms of the reduction. But, going forward, we take note of your request to say that we need to prioritize food security. And then in the next round of the MTech discussions, I believe that agriculture also being, key to economic growth and recovery will be, prioritized so as small business. And we also agree that small business through the guarantee scheme needs to be prioritized. And we took note of the Minister of Small Business yesterday to say that, they are in short of 52 billion and that they can use the guarantee scheme, to tap and get that, funding that is needed to assist the small, medium-sized businesses. Thank you.
Dr. Mampo, any other person? DG?
Thank you,
yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Chairperson, yes, I still have several.
Oh, okay. Let them come in. Well, in your hands. So can the team treasurer come in immediately? Somebody finishes coming so that we save on time.
Chair, there was a question about the big basic income grant. I don't know if Mark, it's a discussion, it remains a discussion, and it has not formally come through our process and systems. And obviously we'll interact with that as soon as it comes through the budget process. But currently it is discussions like many other policy discussions that are taking place in the country and within cabinet, within various political formations, etc., etc. So as soon as that comes to through our processes, obviously we'll process through the various medium-term expenditure committees, and finally those formal processes will kick in, where various intergovernmental structures that I spoke about earlier on will kick in, including all consultations that are necessary before this can become something that will find its way into the budget. But currently, no, it's not in this budget framework. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roy?
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. Just very quick responses on the loan guarantee scheme. Honourable Rider asked about whether or not people can reapply. Yes, they can reapply. On the question whether or not banks are pricing for risk, I think it's quite correct that it's in the bank's best interest to rather use their higher interest rate products to lend on than the loan guarantee scheme. The loan guarantee scheme actually has a fixed preferential interest rate, which is the prime rate. So these small businesses are getting the same rate as the best customers of the business. Honourable Harrison talked about the small business requirements, that tax affairs are not in order. You'll recall we do have a turnover tax system, which does make it a lot easier for businesses to meet their tax requirements. But I think it's very important that businesses are up to date with their taxes, or at least have filled in all their taxes before they can get support from the government. We've worked very closely with the presidency on this part of the scheme, and actually in all parts of the scheme. And I actually was meeting with the presidency people this morning about it. I think the Honourable Butlesia, in the interest of time, we did ask for a summary of the salient features of the scheme. We have got a document on our website, Q&A, which we will also be putting out an updated Q&A either this afternoon or tomorrow morning after the minister's speech, just to update all the different changes that have been made to the scheme. And so that, I think, will go a long way towards explaining the scheme in a very straightforward way. I mean, we really would like to ask members to encourage their constituents to know about the scheme and to apply for the scheme. we certainly want to have lots of applications. And the Honourable Karim made the point that there's been quite a lot of discussion about the scheme, and that there does appear to be a lot of progress that has been made, and I think is quite correct. We definitely have been listening to all the inputs from various stakeholders, across the spectrum, to try and make the scheme better. And even this update is just a kind of an interim update. I think we'll see a lot more about how we can make the scheme get better as it goes along. There was also a question, I think, with Honourable Joseph about the interest on repayments. In terms of that, the interest actually capitalizes, but just the interest component. So you don't have interest on interest. So when you do start repaying, you will have to start paying at the interest rate. But that is obviously linked to the repo rate, and the repo rate, as you know, has come down a huge amount over the last few months, and so it's making a lot cheaper for the scheme to be realized. I think I've covered all the questions.
Roy, you haven't. I take the point about what's going to be updated, but give us a snapshot of what is obtaining now. Obviously, we may go for the detail. I said the main salient features of the scheme. While you can go to the website and so on, I think you can do that. That's number one. And number two, I said, is it 100 billion? Is it 200 billion? Is it 300 billion? Because since we started here, we've had all those figures. Okay, please, if you can.
Yes, certainly, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to go through the details. I'll actually put up a little document just taking you through the main components of the scheme, just to help members a bit. Hope you can all see that one. This is the document that I was talking about, which is answering all the questions about the loan guarantee scheme. This is the previous scheme, so I'll explain a little bit about what has changed. I think to your question about is it 100 billion or 200 billion or 300 billion, how we've structured it is that the first portion will be 100 billion, and then we'll see how that works. And then if there is a capacity to increase it by more than 100 billion, then we will do that, and we'll look at trying to improve how it's designed. And also we have, I think one of the questions that came up was around the role of the DFIs. We have had some engagement with some of the DFIs on potentially how they could come into the scheme. So, this document talks a little bit about how the scheme is structured. It's basically a back-to-back guarantee with the Reserve Bank, who manages the scheme. That is, the Reserve Bank manages the scheme and works with the banks. Which banks are participating? Previously, it was only the big 6 banks, but now we've extended the scheme to another 3 much smaller banks, which we think will help a lot in terms of trying to get more businesses signed up, because particularly some of the small banks actually lend quite a lot to small businesses. So the big banks obviously lend to bigger businesses, and the smaller banks tend to have a bigger market in the smaller end of the spectrum, and so I think it's very important to extend the scheme. In terms of which businesses qualify, at the time it was originally 300 million, with a turnover of less than 300 million and in good standing. As I've said, we've now taken away that turnover component, and then the conditions that are attached to the loan, we've extended this, but at the time the loan was only there for operational expenditures, particularly salaries, rent, and so forth. What we really want people to do is to use the loan in terms of allowing them to keep paying their staff, to keep paying their rent, and to keep paying their municipalities. But also now what we've done is we've extended it to be a business restart loan, which means that businesses can now use the loan to also restart themselves, I think, to make it a lot easier for them to operate. I won't go into, let me talk a little bit about the profits. All the profits actually come to the government because the government is the guarantor of the scheme. we also obviously take all the losses. And the other banks have got a lot of conditions that they have to meet in terms of their criteria. And then, we obviously are worried about what happens if a business that's taken out a loan closes down. In that case, the loan is treated as equity. So I think that was just a quick summary of the salient features of the scheme. I think, Chair, that helped.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Afternoon, Chairperson and honourable members. Julia de Bruin here. The Honourable Joseph wanted us to just remind the committee again what the criteria that the committee must use if you want to make any amendments to what has been proposed. So just quickly from the Money Bills Amendment Act, for every amendment that the committee would like to make, you have to provide a report that indicates the following. Firstly, the reason for such a proposed amendment. Secondly, you must demonstrate how the amendment takes into account the broad strategic priorities and allocations of the relevant budget. Then you have to demonstrate the implications of each proposed amendment for an affected vote and the main divisions within that vote. Fourthly, you have to demonstrate the impact of any proposed amendment on the balance between transfer payments, capital and recurrent spending in the affected vote. Fifthly, you have to set out the impact of any proposed amendment on service delivery. Sixthly, you have to set out the manner in which the amendment relates to the prevailing departmental strategic plan, the reports of the Auditor General, the committee reports adopted by our House, the reports in terms of Section 32 of the PFMA, annual reports, and any other information submitted to a House or a committee in terms of the standing rules or on request. And then finally, for every amendment, you have to include the responses of the Minister or affected member of Cabinet to any proposed amendment. So, for example, should you wish to say you do not wish to have the reduction to the CASP program, you would have to answer all of those questions in relation to that program. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may come in.
Please do.
Yes, Ed Gassish here, just to speak on the compensation side. Members will have noted that in this supplementary budget, while there have been fairly minimal changes to the compensation number compared to the main budget, members must be reminded of the fact that this budget and the allocations are still based on the presumption that the savings on the wage bill that were announced in February apply. 160 billion over the MTF, of which 37.8 billion comes out of the current year's baselines. So it's important for members to be reminded of the fact that while you look at that, we are still assuming that that money comes out of that baseline. We consider that saving is absolutely critical to the credibility of the fiscal framework, given it's what we have said, obviously, including in the Labour Court. But the point is that I just want to remind honourable members that that is the case. I also wanted to make sure, as a last point, to clarify to the committee that when we talk about that wage bill saving that is built in to the framework, there is sometimes a misconception, and the Minister was very clear in this regard in February. There's sometimes a misconception that this means that there is a cut in the salaries of civil servants. The wage bill saving of 160.2 billion is not a cut in the salaries of civil servants. servants. It is a slowdown in the rate of growth. We consider that civil servants are still being remunerated fairly, and that in fact, the past year's remunerations has been more than fair. And in that regard, the savings are built in. We consider that the savings are absolutely essential. Public servants are still receiving their full salaries, and they're still receiving pay progression on those salaries, which is more than I think many people in the private sector can say. But we consider that those savings are absolutely critical, and they are built into the current framework. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairperson, thank you so much to the team.
Excuse me, Chairperson, just a second, Chairperson.
Okay,
Don't mind.
That's fine. It's fine, Zembo. It's fine.
Thanks. Mr. Sishi, just to put ourselves at ease in this question. If at any time soon there's agreement either way in terms of the court arrangement regarding this compensation of employees, won't there be a need for us to reconvene and reconsider whatever arrangement that we have adopted? If that could be clarified there, Chairperson. Thank you.
Mr. Sishi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Honorable Lenzana. Not necessarily, sir, because there's different ways in which we, I presume what you are asking is if we don't, if we lose the fight with the unions. I assume that's the question you're asking. It would have, let me just be clear, it would have a very bad impact on the budgets of departments, a very bad impact. For example, the discussion that was raised earlier about infrastructure is an important discussion in this regard. We consider that an important way in which you are able to redirect funds towards infrastructure and make that infrastructure investment possible for economic growth is if you're able to prevent these monies from going towards salaries more and more and more. And to the extent that that does not happen, to the extent that you end up having to pay higher salaries, unfortunately, that money must come from somewhere. And if you keep the overall ceiling the same, if you keep the ceiling the same, then what you'll find is you'll find that money will be grabbed from other areas in order to feed those compensation budgets in departments. And it's our view that we have to do everything in our part to make sure that does not happen, because that will affect our ability to make those investments. And that will be very bad for the economy, and it will be very bad for government finances. So you don't necessarily need to have a raising in the ceiling and therefore a change in the framework overall, but it will have a significant impact in the composition of expenditure, which we don't want to see happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just quickly on the issue.
Mampo, just a second. Honorable Joseph.
Chairperson, if I may please ask a follow-up question with Mr. Shishi.
I'll allow it, and you are the last one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. I would just want clarity on the accusation that COSATU is making that the Minister or National Treasury is walking away from an agreement that exists. So I understand the inflation is low and that should also in a way open up the economy. But in terms of the agreement, according to COSATU, if the minister would, if the minister didn't come with an
Mr. Sish, you got the drift of the question. Please come in.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, I think the bottom line is, and we've made this point quite clearly, the fiscal and economic situation has been in deterioration for some time and has accelerated now. We're seeing just a bloodbath in jobs, tragic situation in people's earnings, people taking pay cuts of 10, 20, 30, 40%. off of their incomes in this economy, people losing their jobs, as I said. We public servants have got full employment and wage protections. They have pay progression built in. And so what we're saying is that a reasonable approach to managing this and to managing both the public finances on the one hand and the remuneration of public servants on the other, especially when we need nurses and teachers and other frontline services to be there, and we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have to reduce the numbers because we can't afford the salaries. This is something that is absolutely critical, and we think that it is reasonable for labor unions and stakeholders at large to recognize the dire economic situation that we're in, and to recognize that with people losing their jobs in droves, that the issue of moderation in the public service salaries is absolutely critical. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Mampo.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to say the last issue that I see we didn't respond to would be the comments that you made regarding the economic growth and how to fast track the pace of growth in the economy. I think what I wanted to say here is that we did publish a growth paper, and we think that what the reforms that are in that paper we think are so critical in moving the economy. So we are looking at that, and we did do studies on trying to figure out how best we can boost the economy. And we think what we highlighted in the growth paper that was published with the budget review, it's enough for us to start kickstarting the economy, and it focuses on low-hanging fruit such as regulations and other policy directions that don't necessarily need additional funding, but can be done by the departments to reduce the cost of doing business and basically enable the economy to grow.
My apologies, Chair. Dr. Mampo has forgotten to switch on a camera, Chair. I'm sorry.
Dr. Mampo.
Sorry, but I said good deal, sorry.
Dr. Mampo, are you done?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you so much.
But I was very specific, Dr. Mampo. We know that document. I was saying about the things that we consume as a country and the big budget items. Why are we not producing them in the country? And I said in our interaction with some of the departments, they said there are laws and legislation which prevent them from doing that. And my argument is that we make the laws. And I don't think there's a single political party will say, no, we shouldn't localize. So I don't know whether you mind to comment on that.
Thanks, the video. Thanks, Chairperson. I think most of the issues that you are raising will be dealt with through the procurement bill that is up for public comment, and I hope that it will incorporate some of this to make sure that localization becomes a greater feature in how we do things, but most of it can be resolved through the procurement bill. Thanks, Chairperson.
Okay. DG? Okay, I don't know. I'm sure the DG might have gone to the
No, the DG is here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think, look, Mampo did explain. It's a good starting point. I think the sector master plans that I know the economic cluster is busy working on, that specifically answers your question, Chair, and say, why can't we produce ventilators? Why can't we produce masks in the country in bulk? Things that we need on a daily basis. So I think the challenge is there for industry, the challenge is there for various sectors, and our DTI colleagues I know are flat out working on these, because COVID-19 has really, showed us what's possible as a country to actually do things ourselves, and also what's possible for us to be able to boost our economy. So, Chair, thank you very much for the engagement, and we welcome the questions, and those questions that we could not answer in full. Members of the table obviously are more than ready and prepared to provide any written submissions if needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, DG and Roy. Can you please email the document that you have just shared with us to the committee secretaries? And committee secretaries, can you immediately share that document with them as is? I know that you said you were busy with the amendments. And also, once you have made amendments, share those amendments with us. The honorable members would like to study the document more in detail. Honorable members, Honorable Jadu, I don't know whether you would like to say something.
Yeah, yes, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Chairperson, and also for the opportunity to be the co-chairperson today, and also thank you very much, Honorable Fiscal Buthelezi, for your good relationship and also making sure that the two committees between the two houses are operating and working very closely in a good relationship between the committees. And the DG and DOC and Team National Treasury is greatly appreciated in terms of a very detailed briefing and sound calculations, clear reasons for why funds are moved, and also to all the members of both committees of appropriations of the National Assembly and National Council of Provinces, your engagement to ensure proper oversight and accountability. The briefing was effective, and I want to thank all the stakeholders who participated in this meeting. And Chairperson, and once more, thank you very much. If there's nothing else, then we will say that the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Judge. I think this this takes us to the end of this meeting. Thank you very much, DG, and your team, Dr. Mampo. We're still going to engage, and we are meeting tomorrow. Company secretaries, what time? Committee secretaries, beg your pardon.
At 9 o'clock, Chairperson, in the morning, but the members and colleagues will be welcome to join anytime after 8:30.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the team, to the staff, and everybody. The meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you.